What's up, guys? Noah from Stage 3 Motorsports, and I'm joined here today by Scott from Icon. So we're going to be taking a look at some of their shocks and coilovers, and we wanted to focus in specifically talking about the difference between their CDC valve systems and just their standard shocks. So Scott, we've got a couple things laid out on the bench here, but could you start by just explaining kind of the core difference between like a regular shock and one that has that CDC system on there?
Yes, sir. So when we were developing our shock tunes, we basically start out with a non-adjustable shock, usually our 2.5-inch remote reservoir piggyback like this here.
Yeah, pretty standard.
Exactly, yeah. So we'll go through and we'll do all of our ride testing and the development of all that. And once we feel like we have it dialed the way we want it to ride, then we go back using a shock dyno. And that basically lets us run the shocks on there so we can see the curve, much like an engine dyno does. And we set the tuning in the CDC version so that the number 4 setting on our valve is equivalent to the same curve as the non-adjustable version.
Okay.
And so we consider that the baseline, basically.
Gotcha. Then looking at this, if a guy is going for the CDC valve version, what kind of benefit can they get, and how can they adjust that to basically get different performance out of a shock that they wouldn't get with the standard version?
It's all about versatility, really.
Okay.
That's what it is. I mean, we feel like the way that the non-adjustable shocks are tuned works really well for a lot of different situations, but just like with any shock absorber, they're really set up to work for a kind of finite set of parameters, and then when you're operating outside of that, they're not necessarily set up perfectly. So that's where that comes in. You can soften them or stiffen them up as you want to do it, and then there's any number of different reasons for that, from, you know, you want to go real fast off-road or go rock crawl where softer may be better, or if you just have a bunch of weight in the bed of the truck where you need to control a little bit better. It's just a shock that's there ready to go for whatever you need it to do, basically.
Nice. Now, so let's say we've got a system with the CDCV set up on something like the Ranger behind us where there's weight in the bed. You said 4 is kind of the baseline setting, and then somebody's going to want to tick it up in number from there if they want to stiffen it for that weight. Is that correct?
Exactly. So we try to simplify it. Instead of having a knob that you turn where it just clicks, you know, a whole bunch of times, where your average user wouldn't really know what to do with that. You know, it's real hard to tell one click and like, can't really feel what happened.
Yeah.
Exactly.
What changed?
Exactly. So we've wanted to have a higher resolution on each setting, so we limited it to 10. So basically the 10 settings make it real simple for you to choose on how you want to set it up. More weight, generally firmer settings are going to work better, just to help control that, but it's all relevant to the situation and the vehicle setup and the driving style. Even.
Sure, what their preference is.
Exactly, and I get asked all the time, you know, hey, what do you recommend? And honestly, what I recommend isn't necessarily going to work for everybody. Seat time, trying different settings, really trying to see what works for what you want to do is what I recommend.
Awesome. And if a customer was going to run one of these setups, how would you say is the best way for them to sort of test and get a feel for where they want to dial it in? Should they max that out right away and kind of work back from there, or is there a method? Different
lines of thinking on how you want to go about it. Okay. I personally like to start in the middle, just start on number 4 like we usually set as our baseline, and just try different things. Try, you know, your normal commute, or a section of road or dirt road or a trail that you are familiar with, and do different things and try to keep a consistent driving style through that. And that's when you're going to feel the difference in each one. If you just crank them up stiffer and you go faster, well, that's what it's just going to soak it up that much better. So that's usually what's going to happen. You'll find that you become comfortable for a certain setting, and then you're like, oh, this works better. I'm try a little bit higher, and just keep moving that much quicker over the trail and the rough stuff.
Nice, yeah, just get that steady progression to find the sweet spot.
Exactly.
Perfect. Well, one final question here. Might be something kind of simple to ask, but would the CDCV system be the same both on a rear shock and a front shock as far as adjustability? If a guy gets a full kit, is he kind of following those same steps on both front and back?
For the most part, it's the same thought process and how we set it all up. And so, again, personally, on my own truck, I find that I adjust the rears all the time. There's any number of different reasons. I mean, you go to Home Depot or the hardware store and got something in the back and you just need a little bit more. That's a day-to-day sort of thing. Front end stuff, honestly, is mostly a terrain or personal preference, so you find you don't adjust that as often as the rear, but it's handy for when you want it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even personally in my truck, I run a softer setting most of the time, and then even I hit a mountain road and I just want to go up corner carver machines, stiffen them up, and it really has a big impact on the handling, not even just the suspension feel.
Oh, nice. Yeah, control some of the body roll, stuff like that.
Exactly.
Keep it a little more planted. Awesome. So one last thing, Scott, can you kind of explain the engineering behind how these systems work and what that's actually changing within the shock or the coilover itself?
Absolutely. So the CDC valve internally is a secondary piston in addition to your main piston that basically is controlling the rate of flow of the oil into the reservoir on the compression stroke of the shock.
Okay.
Basically in here, if we were to see through this, there's another, we call it the floating piston, separates your oil and your nitrogen. And as the shaft compresses into the shock, that volume of oil that's in here has got to go somewhere. So
Sure.
it flows into the reservoir, and we have a piston in here that will add more damping force as it flows in. What the knob is
Okay.
adjusting is a bleed port around that piston. So on a softer setting, you have a much larger orifice for that oil to kind of bypass that, so it skips it and doesn't really add much more. And the more you close off that hole, it's forcing more oil through that piston to ramp up the damping.
Yeah, give you that resistance that you need.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it's only on the compression stroke. On the other side of that valve is a check valve, and so when the shock's extending, that just opens up and it just dumps the oil back into the shock like it normally would, and all your damping is coming from the main piston inside on the shaft there.
Okay. Very good to know. Well, Scott, I think that's going to be a wrap on this video. We really appreciate you coming in and walking us through all the details of this. I know for most people, jumping in without a lot of prior knowledge to a CDCV system can be really confusing and seem like magic, but there's actually a lot of good engineering and logic behind it. So that being said, if you guys are interested in taking a look at some Icon shocks, or you want to pick up a set for your truck, we'll have some links down in the description that you can take a look at that'll shoot you over to our website, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks, guys.